But there were any questions that came up for you during lunch? No? Okay. 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 So the death process, they say, starts, it's hard to pin it down, but it would seem normally, there's 8 stages that they talk about coming from the Vajrayana description. It's, you know, the more advanced teachings in Buddhism, the more esoteric teachings. It seems like it's a couple of hours maybe before you stop breathing, you know. So of course if you're going to be helping a person at the time of death, is obviously, you know, if you're using this system, it's obviously good to be familiar with this process because you can get to see what stage the person's at, you know, and it can be very helpful. But in general, it's just, like I said, it's this gradual deconstruction of the physical and mental components of a person, you know. First the earth element, the body, and then the capacity to hold a lot of information, and then the eye consciousness begin to cease, and then the ear consciousness and the water element, and then the capacity to even distinguish between pleasure, pain and indifference. Then the next stage, when the fire element ceases, the heat in your body starts to cease, how should I touch? I forget which sense. What sense goes then? I forget. Your nose consciousness, smell, and then even here, even the capacity to even distinguish between friends, enemies and strangers, you no longer, you know, you're kind of losing the plot gradually. And by the 4th stage, which is when you stop breathing, the breath goes out, of course it doesn't go in, and some people can say from their experience this takes quite a lot of time with some people. But, and then the tongue apparently turns very short, goes very short and kind of a bit inflexible, you know. And as one Lama put it, Geshe Rabchen, he said that tongue that has spent its life gossiping is now useless. And then finally, mentally, you no longer can. There's no meaning to anything. You don't even know who you are or anything. This capacity is gone completely, and you stop breathing. And then it could be, as I said, up to 3 days before your consciousness will leave the body. There's no sign of life. But if you're sensitive, people say you can tell the difference. Many people who are like working as nurses or around dead people, they say you can tell the difference when the soul has gone. They'd call it that. Of course, Buddhism would refer to it as the consciousness when that goes, you know. So the ideal scenario is for a Buddhist, you'd keep the body for 3 days if you can. Clearly if you die in a hospital it's not so easy to do. But that would be the ideal scenario. And then when the consciousness, then it keeps going through this process of like more subtle, like I mentioned these red and white drops, you know. The 6th sign is the white one comes down from the central channel to the heart chakra. The 7th is the red, the 6th, 5th, then the 6th is the red drop from here, the navel chakra comes up. The 7th is they join together at the heart chakra. And then the 8th sign, the last one, is when the very subtle consciousness, when this red and white drop, like I mentioned, which comes from the mother and the father at the time of conception, this splits open, and then your very subtle consciousness leaves the body. So it seems like if it leaves through the crown chakra, this is an indication that a type of rebirth you'll have is what they call a Pure Land rebirth, which is really like a subtle type of, it's not in samsara, it's a subtle type of rebirth where you're connected to the Buddhas. They call it a Pure Land. All these different Buddhas have these different ways they manifest to benefit sentient beings at a more subtle level. And mostly they're for highly realized beings who've got high realizations of realized emptiness. But there's another chapter in here that is about wanting to go to Amitabha's Pure Land. This is apparently a type of rebirth that ordinary people can go to, even if you're not highly realized. So if your consciousness leaves, and you can't tell where the consciousness leaves, but if it does leave through the crown, sometimes people say you see the head move slightly. If the consciousness leaves through the eyes, this is an indication that you'll get a human birth. If it leaves through the mouth, it's an indication you'll get a spirit rebirth, which is not cool at all. And this is why it's very important during the process of death, and certainly after the breath has stopped even, you try not to touch the person, because this can cause the consciousness to leave inappropriately when it's not ready, you know. 'Cause even though the person's senses have ceased, still the whole thing of the mind is very sensitive. So it should be totally quiet, only having prayers on. If it's your mouse, your dog, your rat, the same, human. And try and leave the being there for a couple of days if you can. Having mantras and things playing still. If the consciousness leaves through the sex organ or through the anus, I forget which is which, it'd be an animal birth or a hell birth. That's what they say. So, but this is when the mind finally does leave the body. It could be soon after they stop breathing. It could be up to 3 days. So when the mind does leave, what happens is, when as soon as it leaves wherever it leaves, then the end of you are now finished. There's no longer any you. There's no longer any. And even though even as you leave, you then kind of go through these 8 stages in reverse, which is exactly the same as when you wake up after sleep. So the first stage of when you go to sleep and you're deeply sleeping and your senses have ceased, that's like the first stages of death. When you wake up in your dream, so basically you're going through these 8 stages, and then you wake up in the subtle consciousness, and that's when you dream. And then eventually when you wake up and come back into this body, that's like rebirth. And they say this is a very similar process, except when you wake up once your mind leaves the body, then you kind of do this reverse 8 stages, and you wake up in what they call an intermediate state, or the Tibetan term is bardo. And that's like experientially, it's like a dream state. It's just subtle consciousness. The same, and it's a dream state, because like a dream state. But depending on your rebirth, it could be very intense, very nightmarish, or very peaceful. And as soon as your consciousness leaves this body, there's no longer any thought of this person. The karma is completely finished. And when you're in the intermediate state, you can be seeing your own body even, but you have no connection with it. There's no longer any karma. You have no interest. There's no longer any memory of anything, of you being Robina, you know. You're finished, the karma's over. So but what you could say is, many people who come back to life, quote unquote, when you hear stories in all cultures, people knocking on the coffin, can you imagine the horror? Because you know your subtle consciousness is there, and the consciousness hasn't left the body yet. And that means the karma to be in that body hasn't finished yet. So you can still, you're not coming back to life, you're just not, but you come back to consciousness. It's like a person being in a coma, but more dramatic, you know. It must be very horrible. That's why it's so important to be clear the consciousness has gone. So there are various scenarios in which a person dies, isn't it? And each of the several sections covering this. So the first one is if your loved one dies at home. That's the ideal scenario, you know. Then you'd leave, you'd keep the body there for 3 days, you'd treat the place really kind of just the same way as when they were there. You don't, the room where they are, you almost treat it like a shrine room. You'd only have practices on, you'd rotate with people coming in and doing prayers. This is for a Buddhist, right? Or whoever. But you keep it very peaceful for that 3 days. And then when the 3rd day, then usually by then the consciousness has gone, but you would check, you know. There's other ways of checking, but this one is quite easy. You put your hand over the heart chakra, and it will be cold. This shows the mind has gone. There are other ways of checking as well. They're in the book here. Now, the other area, the scenario that mostly people have is you die in some kind of institution, isn't it? Unless you're rich and have a private room. You don't have the luxury of having 3 days, do you, you know?
Not at all.
This is...
Not at all.
No, that's right, exactly. So this is quite problematic. It could be, because you've got to rush. So one of the things, I mean, I don't know what it's like in Greece, but the point is, at least if you know your loved one's going to be dying there in a nursing home or a hospital, you've got to know your rights. Some hospitals, you know, certainly in some countries, they're really kind and compassionate. You can do, you know, you can talk in advance. You should talk in advance and ask them to not touch the body when they stop breathing, to give you as much time as you can. And it might be just that they don't need that bed immediately. You might even have a few hours. So part of the problem is when people die, you're so emotional, you just hand over all your power to the doctors and the nurses, and of course they do their job, you know. Well, the main thing is to not touch as long as possible. And you know, like I say, you're in the hospital with your loved one and it's the middle of the night. Don't rush in the nurses. Don't call the nurses. Just be glad that no one's there and use the time as much as you can to do prayers and practices and things. And all those things are in the book. Michelle says what to do, you know. Different practices you can choose. But the key thing is to leave the body as long as possible. So since this book was done, I wish I'd talked to Rinpoche earlier, there's something that's really practical that you could do, but it's not in the book unfortunately, but it's what happened with one of our friends, one nun who'd lived a life in India, and she was English and she was in Australia. She'd retired, she was going to live in Nepal and do some editing of Lama Zopa's teachings. Well, she went to the hospital, had cancer, and they gave her 2 months to live. So Lama Zopa said, well, stay in Australia. So she died with our friends helping her. And then when she actually stopped breathing, the nun who was helping, Rinpoche was on Skype, Lama Zopa, and Rinpoche's attendant, Holly, an Australian nun, she was there, and she said that Rinpoche's meditating, so she was taking care of our friend who'd passed away. And then Lama Zopa gave instructions to leave her in the fridge in the hospital for 10 days. So one of the things that happens is that people can meditate. Once they go through this death process, you can, when you get to the very subtle level, many of them stay in their bodies for days and days and even weeks. And I'll read you something from this as well. That's the great yogis who really got control over the process. And then they get to the very subtle consciousness, which is what they want to do, because that's the most powerful level of mind. Then they can do their trip there and do their meditating, realize emptiness, understand, get all the realizations, removing all the rubbish from the mind. It's a really intense job they're doing in their mind. That's the time they've really been waiting for. As Lama Zopa says, I'll just read you this chapter. Well, I'll say more about this in a minute.
Something to look forward to.
That's right. In here, it's death is what the yogis have been... Actually, this chapter in this book, did you say that because you were...
No, because...
Why did you say that just then?
Because it sounds like something looking forward.
Because the name of the chapter I'm about to read you is Death is what the yogis have been waiting for. That's interesting, you should say that, isn't it? This is exactly the chapter I'm going to read. Death is what the yogis have been waiting for. Which sounds a bit weird for ordinary people. Like they're depressed or something. No, but they're not. No, I can't find it. I have to look for it. That's curious you should say that, Ronit. Because this is what he says. Death is what the yogis have been waiting for. Okay. Generally, it's not permitted to openly give details of the methods that the great yogis use. However, I feel it would be useful to talk briefly about them here. Death is the moment they've been waiting for. At the point in the death process when all the grosser consciousnesses have ceased and only the extremely subtle consciousness is left, those who have observed karma well, kept their precepts purely, spent their lives training their minds in the clear light meditation, and have been able to recognize, these stages in their meditation, then when they die, they're in control of the process, basically. They are now able to recognize the clear light of death. Clear light is a term they use to refer to this very subtle consciousness. They can remain in meditation in the clear light conjoined with the understanding of emptiness for as long as they wish. 1 hour, 3 days, many months. Some meditators stay in the clear light meditation in their hermitage for years. Lama Yeshe, for example, Lama Zopa's Lama and my Lama too, he stayed days in meditation. There are many examples like this. By concentrating in this subtlest state without distraction, some practitioners achieve enlightenment at this time. They actually realize the 3 kind of energies of a Buddha, the bodies of a Buddha, they say. They transform ordinary death into the Dharmakaya, which is the actual Buddha's mind, the ordinary intermediate state into this subtle body that the Buddhas can manifest in to benefit the great yogis in their meditation, which is called the enjoyment body, or Sambhogakaya, and ordinary rebirth into what they call the Nirmanakaya. Never mind. So the practices these yogis do are available to those who have taken a highest Tantra initiation or empowerment. They are the quickest methods to achieve enlightenment in one brief lifetime of this degenerate time. These practices have a very special arrangement, and doing the sadhana, which is this Sanskrit word referring to this particular practice, and this is for people who understand this, otherwise it just sounds a bit you won't understand. The complete sadhana, not just simply, so these practices, these sadhanas have a very special arrangement. And doing the sadhana every day, the complete sadhana, not just simply generating yourself as the Buddha and then reciting the mantra without the mandala, not like that, is a very important preparation for death. You will understand this when you have received the commentaries on the generation stage and the completion stage tantric practices. Every time you meditate, you are preparing your mental continuum by purifying ordinary death, ordinary intermediate state, and ordinary rebirth, enabling you to actualize the result of Buddhahood at the time of death. Whether you do the long version of the sadhana or the middle version, they both contain the essence of the generation stage practice of transforming these three experiences. And then on the day you die, because you have trained your mind by meditating like this every day, you are able to recognize what's happening, all the various stages of dissolution and so on, you know. You're able to recognize the clear light, and then during the intermediate state and the birth time, you'll be able to, you know, transform these stages. When you just recite the words, there is, of course, a positive imprint left on your mind, but you're not strongly preparing your mind as you would if you were to actually meditate. Practicing like this is incredible. It's the quickest way to purify all the defilements. That'll do for now on that one. Okay. So this thing of the different scenarios, so back to this one, let's say my friend, when Lama's, so okay, because the next, first of all you're at home, the next one is what if your loved one dies in hospital? Well there, you know, you might have a half an hour if you're lucky. So it's really important that you, like I'm saying, you do know your rights, that you've got your wits about you, that you know in advance that when your loved one will die and you want to have them as long as possible. So you know that and you really hope that you'll be there. Or if you're not, you get them not to touch and to call you immediately no matter what time. That's really important. And I mean, if the doctors and nurses in the hospitals are halfway reasonable, they'll do your wishes, you know. So then you take as long as you can. So in the case of Lama Yeshe, he passed away in America in 1984 or something. And he was a yogi, he meditator, okay? So let me just find this chapter and I'll read a bit from there as well about how he passed away. So when Lama Yeshe passed away in the hospital, because he's a meditator, I mean he's in control of this process. But Rinpoche was with him. So before he passed away, the nurses were watching intently throughout the night. The moment Lama's heart stopped, people rushed in with a defibrillator and wanted to try to get it started again. It was all very hectic. I had checked with one of his own lamas to see if it was beneficial to try and put the defibrillator on Lama, and he said yes, it was. So the doctors tried. And he said that the defibrillator is very strong, it pulls the body up violently. And Lama opened his eyes for a moment and then his body fell back down. The doctor then said there was no hope. It was about 5 o'clock in the morning. It was my first time dealing with someone passing away in the West. I had no experience. Apparently they usually take the body to the mortuary where they prepare it, but I didn't think we needed to do that. So that's for ordinary people and those who are not not for those who are in meditation state like Lama. So anyway, he remained in meditation in a private room throughout the day. So in this case, Lama said the doctors were so kind, they organised in advance, and so they needed the room, so they wheeled him very gently and they gave them one spare room for the day. So that's the kind of thing too, if you can organise with the hospital, you just don't know. But if you sit there weeping and the hospital take over, there's nothing much you can do. They're going to run the show. You've got to know what you want and you've got to know your rights and organise it in advance. It's really important. So Lama says, you know, in the chapter, Rinpoche says, even a half an hour, better than nothing, you know. I'll say some more about that in a minute. So Lama didn't need, so anyway, Lama remained in meditation in a private room throughout the day. By the late afternoon, we couldn't stay there any longer, so then what you should do then, Rinpoche had been advised, you'd sort of make your requests, for example, in this case for Lama, to stop meditating. And he touched his crown. This is something you can do to help your consciousness leave through here. I'll read more about this in a minute. Anyway, they put Lama's holy body in a box, packed in ice, and took it to a mortuary. And the next day, one of the people, they drove it 350 miles north up to Lama Yeshe Center, Vajrapani Institute, near Santa Cruz in Boulder Creek. And then for 5 days, many of us went, I was living in Europe at the time, we all went there and did these prayers and practices for like 5 days. And the whole time his body was in the coffin. So it seems, so what happened, Lama said, he said, in his case, they didn't bury him. There's a common thing they do in Tibet. You either burn the body, they don't usually bury, you burn the body, or something they do in Tibet and still do, I think. They feed it to the birds. They call it sky burial. You get the body, you chop it all up into the hard bits and the soft bits, and then all the big vultures come and eat the lot. Well, it's very efficient. Yeah. There's no real estate used, there's no blood and guts around, the birds eat the lot. I mean, how practical.
No pollution.
No pollution, that's right, exactly. Very efficient. Huh?
Offering.
Yeah, exactly, offering to the creatures. And they all sit there hovering, these big birds, and they come, eat the lot. So the other way they do is, for someone like Lama Yeshe, who was a yogi, they do what they call they do a special kind of ceremony with many prayers for many hours, burning the body. They build a particular stupa, and then you burn the body and do all these things, these rituals and stuff. So when they were preparing Lama's body for the fire puja, Lozang, this monk, who'd been one of the monks, who was an ex-monk, who was there organising it all, he reported that even though Lama's body had been lying in the coffin for many days, his limbs were still very flexible. And then the monk noticed another sign. They talk about another sign that the consciousness has left. When the red and white drop split open at the heart, the white one in the male will continue down and go out through the sex organ, and the red one comes up and comes out through the nostril. So this could be a bit tricky if it's a bit messy, but you can usually often see this subtle kind of slightly pink stuff here, and all white from the sex organ. I think it's the reverse with women. That's a sign too, the consciousness has gone. And as Lama says here, it was only then that this drop came out. So that means that Lama Yeshe had been meditating for like 5 or 6 days because his body was still flexible. And that's the point. They find that even though they meditate sometimes for weeks, the body will shrink and get very small, but that doesn't stink because the subtle consciousness is there, Okay, so back to now what to do in the different scenarios.
What happens if you're alone?
Huh?
If you're alone, what can you do?
Well, depending on your skill, most people nothing. Isn't it?
If you're in an accident, God forbid, and you're lying at the bottom of a mountain, you've had a ski accident, and you know you're going to die.
Well, that's the one. That's it. There's lots of things you can do if you're a Buddhist and if you have a practice. So you'd have, any practice you've done in your life, thinking about impermanence, recognizing death is definite, knowing all this stuff. Finally, the time has come, and here it is. It's boom. It's real. It's true. I am going to die. Here it is. And whatever practices you've got, as much as you've got your sanity with you, is what you'd try to do, wouldn't you? Based on your experience. Oh, I see. I think not. No, that's only once they've stopped breathing, just before you move the body. That's very cute. So the usual scenario, so before you move, let's say your loved one's at home and you've had the 3 days, then you would do this, you double check if the mind is still there. And then to be sure, what you could do, they say, is tug really vigorously here, which is, you see, there's just in front of the spine, if the spine were to go all the way up, this is where the central channel is. And this very subtle, you want the very subtle consciousness is at the heart chakra. And when it does leave, it'll go up through here, it'll go through here, through the mouth or the anus or the sex organ. You don't want those. Which is why I always like to say, please don't kiss your loved one when they're dead, because that could encourage their consciousness to come out of here, and that means they're going to get a spirit birth. What a drag, So keep back off.
Spirit, take the mouth off.
That's just right, it's horrible. A lower realm rebirth, a horrible one. So, what are you saying?
He said it's not so bad.
Why is it?
No, spirit is it's a name. It's not the way we use it in our culture. It's referring to an intensely suffering rebirth, like ghosts. Like ghost is an example of spirits, and they're not happy beings. Because due to very strong, like one type of ghost we know about, isn't it? People who haunt houses, we're talking about haunting houses, and people even see a vision of this 18th century lady. Well, that's what people who've got intense attachment to a certain place will get born there, you know, as a spirit or an animal, or it could be or humans as well, but and a happy rebirth wouldn't be a good one. So what you can do before you move the body, this is the typical 3-day scenario, before you finally get the body to organise and have it ready for the funeral and everything, and there's lots of things you can do there, we've got no time to talk about all that's in the book. You'd then tap here or tug really vigorously. That's where the crown chakra is. Your central channel, which would be just in front of the spine, goes all the way up and ends in just the top here. You'd press, tap really, not gently, really strongly, or tug really strongly to encourage the consciousness to leave through there. So nevertheless, they say, remember I said before, okay, found it, that before you even breathe, normally the karmic seed that will determine your next life has already been triggered. But things can change, you know. You can, by doing this, you can even help the consciousness go to a pure land. This is a type of rebirth. So there's an interesting story here. I know I was in Kathmandu one time with visiting with a friend, having dinner with Rinpoche with his friend, and then Rinpoche recommended we go to one of the stupas. So we hopped in the car and went on what they call the ring road in Kathmandu, this big wide road, but you know, full of trucks and motorbikes and bulls and God knows what, you know, messy, big messy road with cars everywhere. And my friend who was driving ran over this little family of ducks. So mummy duck and most of the ducklings got away, but one baby duck didn't get away. So we spent like a half an hour with Lama Zopa in the middle of this maniac ring road, was trying to help the baby duck. So it's little heart, you can even see its little heart exposed, going boom, boom, like this, you know. And Lama Zopa did this practice that they call in Tibetan Powa, which means transference of consciousness. And there's this particular practice that yogis can do to help, or for yourself, or for other beings. So Rinpoche was doing this Powa practice to help the consciousness of the duck leave through the crown chakra, which meant the little duck would get a Pure Land rebirth. We spent at least 30 minutes there. I don't know if he succeeded, but he probably did because he's pretty powerful. So I thought, well, what a lucky duck, you know. What a way, what a way to die, you know. Wow, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, so if you are a practitioner, you've done this over your life, you would do this Powa practice before you die. And if you haven't, if by the time when the mind has left, before the mind has left, when the breath stops, that's when you'd call your Lama, if the person wants it, and they would do the Powa practice to help the consciousness leave through the crown chakra. And then if by the time the body's ready to be buried, and you haven't had that done, or not buried, but moved, you then would do this to encourage the consciousness to leave through the crown chakra. And then you can do what you like with it. Now, if they're in the hospital, the same. So you take whatever time you've got, you do the same type of practices, they're all in the book, and then before you move the body, you hopefully get the consciousness to leave. Because it's a big drag if they start mucking around with the body and the consciousness is still there, which is what commonly happens, of course, because no one checks to see if the mind is still there, you know. But what interesting is what I'm saying, I wish Rinpoche had said this before the book was finished, because he said to my friend Yeshikaru, the nun, to put our friend Trisha in the fridge for 10 days, which indicates she must have been meditating. So in the fridge is perfect because no one's going to disturb you. And I taught, over the years now, since this book is out, I teach this very often at courses around the world. People really like to, and lots of people come, Christians come, other people come because they're interested in the Buddhist view about death. And often mortuary people, funeral home directors come. They're wonderful people. They're so interested in death and how to, different views. And they all tell me that they're more than happy to have you in the fridge for a while. They don't care. They sometimes keep bodies in the fridge for months while litigation happens and people coming from other countries. So they're very happy to do that. They don't ask questions. So that would be a really easy thing to do with your loved one. Don't have to worry about getting the consciousness to go. Just put it in the fridge for 3 days. So you know then eventually the mind will leave and then they can do what they want with the body, It's very practical. I wish he'd said this before the book. Then I would have put it in. Do you understand? It was very helpful. Hang on a sec. What's going on here, buddy? What?
Sorry,
Yeah.
someone who, a lay person,
A regular old person dying, yeah.
they die,
Yeah.
they stay with the body because they're attached. And that's why...
No, it's just natural that an ordinary person, any person, including a dog, it can take up to 3 days before the consciousness leaves the body.
And what's the consciousness doing?
It's just sitting there, and mostly it's unconscious. If you're a yogi, you're meditating. But for some people, it could be like you're having like dream experiences. It could be that.
Why would you want to stay longer?
You don't want or not want. It's just the way it is. It's just been found to be that way. Do you understand my point?
Yes, but...
It's not a question of wanting.
I know, but...
Oh, why would you? In this case, because in Rinpoche's, all I can deduce from Rinpoche's instruction, given that he's, I presume he's a holy being who's got clairvoyance and knows what's going on, he could see that Trisha was meditating. So instead of disturbing her body and getting them to, stick it in the whatever they do, he just said, leave her in the fridge for 10 days, which meant he could see she was meditating. And in her case, it is advantageous to not move the body, because while you're meditating, you're getting realizations. And many of the yogis stay in their bodies for days, if not weeks. And they're meditating. But ordinary people aren't meditating. We're just spacing out, like fast asleep, like asleep, Do you understand my point? What they say. Okay.
That point that meditating, they can achieve more light.
That's the point. That's the whole point. Because the simple reason, Neil, is because this very subtle level of consciousness, even in single point of concentration, what we've started from the first day, what we're trying to do is get past the grosser level of our mind in order to get to a subtler level, because that's more powerful, that can do the job of getting rid of all the rubbish and getting the realizations. That's the bottom line, finally.
So in that point, it's the most crucial. You can
This one, according to this system, the Tantrayana system, the Vajrayana system, these techniques in Tantra are much more powerful, and you can get to this extremely subtle level of consciousness that only occurs at death. But the greatest yogis can do it before then, or if they're preparing, they're ready for it at the time of death. They can literally go through the process being conscious at each ever more subtle level, and then they can stay at that subtle level for as long as they need to do the job they have to do to complete their realizations. Do you understand? Yeah. So if the next scenario, and this is the one about giving the organs, and this is the problematic one. All I can do is tell you the things that Buddhism says, and it's up to everybody. But I found it so interesting reading that, that doctor's book, the medical journalist, The Undead, and that experience of the heart beating double the rate. That was very intense, I thought. That was fascinating. Do you understand what I'm saying, people? Mm-hmm. So the organ one is interesting.
Robina, these yogis that can stay for as long as they want, do they have reached at least a level of I don't know, first bhumi or nirvana or something, or is it they are in the closest to?
Okay, in order to go through this death process with complete control, you're a pretty amazing yogi already. And I think more than likely you've got a pretty powerful experience of emptiness. But you've got this extraordinary technique to get your mind to that very subtle, pretty subtle level, and that's pretty intense. And you'd have to have fairly powerful concentration, immense concentration, and it's more than likely, I don't know all the technicalities, you'd have to have a realization of emptiness already. Once you realize emptiness from the first moment, you've got a long way to go before you get enlightened. So they've surely got a realization of emptiness. And when they're going through this process, they're able to meditate on emptiness all the way, and then get to the very subtle level, and then really, really get realizations at that point. Is that answering your question?
What kind of realizations?
Becoming a Buddha. Getting your consciousness to, just to remind you what a Buddha is. When you're a Buddha, your consciousness will be pervading the universe. You'll have infinite wisdom that sees everything as it is, including all the minds of all sentient beings. You'll have infinite compassion for every sentient being, as if they were you, because you've completely cut any sense of a separate I. And you'll have infinite power to manifest this consciousness of yours throughout universes for as long as it takes to benefit sentient beings. That's what a Buddha is. Okay? So boredom won't get you there. When I first heard all these teachings, I thought when I first heard all these teachings, especially about bodhicitta, which I keep promising to talk about, but time's really running short. We'll see. I thought these people were out of their brains. You know, I thought, how can they say this stuff with a straight face? You know. But now I'm saying it with a straight face. Or I crack jokes as well. So what to do? So the next one is, what if your loved one dies suddenly? That's going to happen. Your grandma drops dead in the soup, a car accident, isn't it? So again, all you've got to do is have your wits about you. What can you do except have your wits about you? And so I remember one of my friends, you know, in Santa Cruz, he and the wife and the daughter, all friends of mine, all Buddhist. So he had a really bad heart, Paul, and he kept getting his wife to promise that if he collapses on the ground, don't call the doctors. But of course she panicked and she called the doctors, you know. That's what happens. So that he didn't want the doctors to revive him. He knew what he wanted, you know. So she got the ambulance, he brought him into the hospital. It was 4 in the morning and Tova, the daughter, rang me up. We went there and you could tell he couldn't talk, but he had all the wires in, and she knew he didn't want this. So we did all the right prayers that he wanted, and then they pulled the plug. And then it was interesting, we couldn't take him back home after that. We would like to have had him for 3 days, but they wouldn't let us. Whereas even the time of Lama Yeshe, the hospital, the laws were such that we could take him, drive him all the way, and we kept him in the centre for 5 days. We had all the ceremonies at the Buddhist centre. But in this case, this is 30 years later, in the same state, they wouldn't let us do that. We had to keep him, we had to get him sent to the mortuary. So we got him, the hospital were very kind, you know, they drove him really gently in the ambulance to put him in the mortuary, and then we spent the whole day with him on the stretcher in the room doing prayers and things, and then we had to leave at 4 o'clock. And they said we couldn't stay. They were going to stick him in the fridge with all the other dead bodies, right? So we gave them a CD of the Gyuto monks chanting. And they promised they'd play it in the fridge, right?
So everybody enjoyed it.
So all the people heard that, yeah, Gyuto monks chanting. Then we went back the next day and did another all-day stuff. And then we had the business. There's things you can do. But I couldn't put that in here because it's not Lama Zopa talking. This is his book, you know, not mine. So all the different practices you can do, blah, blah, blah. The suddenly one, you've got to use your wits. You've got to have, if you can bring the person back to life, please do it, you know. But sometimes when you're emotional, you're freaking out and nobody knows what to do. If you can use your, you know, if you're on a car accident, you see a person nearly dying, do what you can. Help them. Keep your mind calm, you know.
Is there a mantra you can...
Millions of mantras. This book's full of them. Rinpoche knows mantras that no one else has ever heard of, I promise. There's so many different, there's 87 different practices. 2/3 of the book is the practices that you can select from. He says what to do at each stage. You know, you can select the ones you want. So, yes, darling.
10 years ago, when my father died, it was during he was asleep in the morning. He had something happen with his heart. And my mother called the ambulance and everything, and they worked on him something like half an hour or even more. And they, you know, the heart, he was not alive anymore, but they brought him back, but only the heart.
So then? So what happened after that?
Yeah. Well,
I'm asking, what do they do then?
I was 5 months unconscious until the...
I see. Okay.
Yeah, until it was.
Until he passed away eventually. So your question from that
is, was he still there?
Yeah, of course. If he's breathing, of course he's there still. The subtle consciousness. Well, he didn't leave. He would have stopped breathing. That meant his gross consciousness had ceased. And then they got him back to life, and that means his subtle consciousness was there, but he never came fully back to consciousness, right?
Like he didn't want this to come back.
Well, maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I don't know about that, and you might know. But meanwhile, if you were a Buddhist and that were happening, then you know there's subtle, they're like in a coma, basically. That means as a Buddhist, you'd have the practices and prayers day and night. There's a friend of mine who's got a daughter who's like this, has been for years, just like a vegetable. They haven't killed her, haven't pulled the plug, so he has practices on all the time. That's what he's doing. So that could be immensely beneficial for a person. They can't do anything. In the West we don't think this way, but they can't themselves do anything. But hearing all those practices, hearing connection, getting connection with the Buddha, with all the mantras, that's unbelievably powerful for them, and they're purifying every single second. That's what you do as a Buddhist. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. As you're the father, of course, you don't know, you know. Did they do anything like that? Did they do prayers and things? No?
No, it was...
Not religious. Okay.
It was religious, but only, you know, when we went to the grave.
Of course, yeah, I know, we don't think what to do with them right now. Understand, yeah. So, and of course, if your loved one's a yogi, just close the door and mind your own business. They're fine on their own, okay? That's basically the point. So, any questions more from this? Just as a bit of an overview. Any questions? The book, I can give you the website and tell you how to get the book, or I can, I can tell Tsiki and then he can send you the link. You've got emails of everybody? If those who want it, you can send in the...
Anyway, the contact list.
Yeah, of course, and also you can also send the PDF of the teachings, have as well on their computer, and also I'll just send you this death book. I'll send it to you, and then you can forward it on to everybody if they want it, and they can throw it out if they don't want it. Yeah. Okay, good. So, any questions from this, and then we can talk about the compare.
About life.
Pardon?
Huh? You said a PDF, like also the book about life, not only about
life.
Yeah. So until they get to experience death, they will keep their practice in this life.
Shut up, Tsiki. You're always cracking jokes. It's boring. A meaningless question. You just mislead me. Shut up and be quiet.
I have a question.
What?
Emptiness a bunch of times, but
Yeah. Okay, darling. I began to talk about it. It was where there's no I. So I have to talk about more, you mean? You want to know more, do you? Blimey. Okay. This is, okay, this word emptiness is so confusing. People have even been studying for 30 years, say, oh, I don't know what emptiness is, I don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. I've tried to understand it. It gets very confusing, but it's not, if we really like all these things, like you learn the words properly and think about it, so slowly, some meaning. So the point is this, okay. Like I said yesterday, the Buddha's deal is, in this mind of ours, we have lots of virtuous, reasonable, valid states of mind that are, relatively speaking, in sync with reality. Then we have lots of states of mind that are completely wacko, and they're the source of all our suffering and the cause of why we harm others, and therefore the cause of rebirth after rebirth in samsara, life after life after life. And we want to cut this nonsense, get rid of the delusions, right? And then develop the goodness and then become this enlightened being who can help others, roughly speaking, as we've been talking. Okay. So how we talked about all the neurotic states of mind, the deluded states of mind, the attachment and the anger, the day-to-day stuff, they're rooted in this deepest delusion, as I mentioned, that's so primordial that we really don't have a name for it in our culture or our psychology, I would suggest. And it all sounds very abstract and kind of abstract because it's not something we articulate because we haven't observed, I would suggest, what the Buddha is saying. So basically, this root, they call it the root delusion. Like I've often mentioned, there's like a hierarchy of these neuroses, and I find that a really helpful way to put it because the root delusion, the misconception of the very self, your own very self, it's this distorted, exaggerated, deeply instinctive, primordial misconception that causes us to frantically cling to this concrete, solid sense of a separate self that gives rise to this massive attachment, this junkie every day to get what the supposed self wants, which then gives rise to anger and panic when it doesn't get what it wants, and then the jealousy and all the other dramas. That's the deal. Okay, so in the preparation for this is daily controlling your body, controlling your speech, living in vows, doing lots of purification, which I never got to talk about. And then you get to concentrate, get your concentration meditation down, you learn Buddha's model of the mind, you really start to unpack and unravel your consciousness. This is preparing you to get to the deepest level where you now want to recognize and see clearly and argue with and get rid of the deepest delusion, which is the one that keeps us going in samsara. Do you understand? Okay, so the word emptiness is to do with this. Okay, it's just the way they've used this over the centuries, okay, this term. All right. Like we said yesterday, I used one understanding of trying to, one level of comprehension of how the I, the self, exists interdependently. So the I exists in dependence upon its parts. So what I said yesterday was this deepest ignorance, and they call it colloquially known as ego grasping, this primordial mistake in the mind, is, one level of the mistake it makes it's not the subtlest mistake, totally believes that in here somewhere, like we talked, there really is a separate, independent, a separate piece, a separate component, a separate part that is independent of the other parts, that's like the boss called I. That discussion. Remember that discussion. Okay, where the word emptiness comes into that is this. Buddha's telling us there isn't such a piece. So let me use a simple example of something. A simple example of there not being something that we think is somewhere. Let's say you look at this, you know, this thing here, and it looks to me it's like about sort of red. But let's say you're colourblind and you see blue. Let's just say. All your life, whenever red appears to you, you see blue. Well, in conventional terms, you're making a mistake, aren't you? There's a delusion in your mind. In this case, it's in your eye consciousness. So this is a fairly easy example. So we can bully you into believing it's red, but if you see blue every time, it doesn't help you to believe it's red. We want you to see the truth and to recognise it's red, don't we? You agree? It makes sense, all right? So we'd fix your eyes, wouldn't we? We'd fix your eyes. So now, let's just say we fix your eyes and I present it to you again. What do you think you will now see? Red. It makes sense to say that. Totally makes sense. But I'll tell you what you'll see first. You'll go, oh my God, it's not blue. Why would you say that?
Because you expect it.
Precisely. All your life, you've built up this story in the mind. You've seen, you believe it's blue, you've expected it to be blue, you know it's blue, you've never doubted it's blue, and you get the shock of your life when the truth is revealed to you, but first you're going to see, and these are the words, the absence of the thing you thought was there.
Okay.
And that's called the emptiness or the absence of blue. So if you believe there's 5,000 euros in your, I don't know what kind of money you have in your bank, but what kind of money you have in your bank? Where are you from? What? Dollars? Good. Let's say you know there's $5,000 in your bank. With absolute certainty. You've saved it, you know it's there, and you're expecting it. This is the point. It's built up in your mind as an absolute truth. And then you open the bank account, and in reality there is a zero written there. Well, believe me, you won't just go, no dollars in my bank and close the account again. You won't. You will get the shock of your life, the same. You go, oh my God, where's my $5,000? So the phenomenon you just cognized, which is obviously an abstract phenomenon, it's not written there, minus $5,000. You understand? Because you expected 5,000, the phenomenon that your mind will directly cognize technically is called the absence of $5,000. That's the word emptiness merely is like that. But clearly, Buddha's not telling us that things are empty of $5,000. He's telling us that there is no this fantasy I. Forget how it exists. He says we've got a fantasy belief of an I in here. But he says there isn't one. So finally in your meditation at a subtle level, based on all the thinking and the practice you've done over the years, all the analysis, the logic, hearing that there isn't that I, but you still believe it because it's so primordial. And then eventually when you get to your subtle level of mind, and that's why you've got to get to a subtle level, because only there, it's like the microscope of your mind, can you actually cognize the truth, that at some point you will have your first recognition, direct, no-nonsense, real cognition of the absence of that fantasy I. So the word emptiness is referring to that.
Thank you.
That's literally the use of the word. But sometimes people see it as an alternative to absolute or God, some weird kind of wacko ideas. Initially it is an abstract concept, but once you get the meaning, it has great power to recognize, you know. So that they shorthand, you've got to realize emptiness. You've got to see the truth in the depth of your own mind that there isn't, there never has been, and there never could be this particular fantasy I. Of course, all the analysis has to be to see the logic of that. But that's the final meaning of it. And then you have to practice perfecting that until eventually it's complete, genuine realization. And they say that's when you cut all the suffering. Because the belief in this fantasy I, which causes the belief in the divine objects and the ugly objects and all the dramas that our delusions make up, this is the source of suffering. So by cutting the root, all the other branches kind of tumble, you know. And eventually the perfecting of this is the realization of wisdom. And you can't ever fall back after this. You're out of samsara from there. Do you understand?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you. I have another question.
Yeah, go.
So what does love without attachment.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let's go to the compassion wing now. Okay, good. Okay, good. So love is under the positive heading. Compassion is under the positive heading. And in many ways in Buddhism, you can even hear it, the compassion wing, they summarize this whole business as compassion. Often you hear others say the essence of it is love, but they're flip sides of the same coin. So love is, if you wanted to give it a definition, it's the bare bones thought, may you be happy. When I see you happy, I delight in your happiness. Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart, is altruistic, it's completely to do with you. And of course, you've got to grow it to degrees. And then compassion is may you not suffer. So the essence of, so in all the compassion wing techniques, you're aiming to develop these to this astonishing degree for every being equally. So now we know we have love and compassion. We do, we have bucket loads of it, but for a very small group. And usually it's only those we have attachment for, which means are those who do what my wishes, fulfill my wishes. So whether that's the poodle as opposed to the rat, or whether the beloved the husband or your child whom you are harmonious with, and so naturally we have love for those people. But that's what happens, if Panos gives me up for Angeliki, then love turns into anger overnight, and now he's in my enemy category, and I can't stand the sight of him. So at the moment, and normally in our world we would consider the love we do have, and some people can have immense love, and often can be for strangers as well. Okay, let's just look at the scenario here. They talk about, and I mentioned it earlier, in Buddhist psychology you can say you've got these three fundamental delusions. There's many of them. The root one is ignorance, which gives rise to attachment, which gives rise to anger. But another way to say it is you've got attachment, and in terms of sentient beings, and this is in the compassion wing discussion, they're the ones who we call our friends. A simple word, those who fulfill our attachment's needs. We often know that so-called friends also make us crazy, but in general, a person who fulfills your attachment's needs, you put them in the friend category. Then you've got those who have harmed us, probably, and so we've got them in the enemy category because they don't, not only do they not do what our attachment wants, they've even done what our attachment doesn't want. They've harmed us, they've been mean, they've cheated, they've lied. Do you understand my point? The sentient beings we can't stand, and that can include the rats and the cockroaches too, whatever sentient beings you can't bear. And then you've got 99.9999% of the rest of them, and they're the objects of indifference. And how do you feel about them? Couldn't care less. So we have attachment for the beloveds, aversion for the uglies, and complete indifference to the rest of them. So this ignorance, this root delusion they call, this one that I just referred to before as ego grasping, it's actually technically called ignorance. In Tibetan, ma rigpa, unawareness. And it's this primordial, as I said, in relation to how things exist, it's completely mistaken. But it's got, in day-to-day life, it's got two main functions. One is it makes you very narrow-minded, and really what we mean by ignorance, a very fundamentalist person, a racist person, a really sexist person, a really narrow-minded idiot person with a really strong ignorant mind. Do you understand? And the other way it manifests, as we're discussing here, is in relation to strangers. A stranger, by definition, is a person who's neither harmed nor helped us, right? So therefore, because of our delusions, naturally we couldn't care less about them. Isn't it? That's the way. So we either have attachment to the beloveds, aversion for the meanies, and indifference to 99.9% of the rest of the universe. Because they simply, like I mentioned, remember I mentioned that thing about Tasmania?
Yeah.
I read the news story. First it was Tanzania, and I went, oh, it's okay. When I saw that there's a ferry accident, 350 people die in Tanzania. Straight away, I thought it was Tasmania, oh, my people. And then suddenly it's these strangers, so you don't care. So of course I saw my mind and I tried to have compassion and work out where's Tanzania, you know. But it's sort of natural, we are all like this. And this is what Buddha says, this is samsara. And so in the compassion wing approach, okay, the wisdom wing approach, which is almost everything we've talked about up till now, it's all about putting yourself together, getting rid of you, stop harming others because you don't want more suffering, control your mind because you don't want more suffering, and for your sake, and don't underestimate this. We often think a spiritual practice is all about, oh, lovey-dovey, loving everybody else. Yes, that's actually more advanced. And I'm going to try and explain why. The real first level has to be your own work. Look into yourself, understand your own delusions, understand your own suffering, and you're going to have to want to be sick of suffering. This is, I mean, when you mentioned before about compassion for yourself, they don't talk about it like that, but that's the way we would say it. So by working on your own mind, the basis is because you are sick of suffering. When you're sick of suffering, that's when you do something about it. When you're finally fed up with those lungs, you'll give up cigarettes. When you're finally fed up with being too fat, you'll give up eating, or, you know, go on a diet. So you've got to realise you're suffering. And that means out of not some brutal beat yourself up, but out of some compassion for yourself. So all Buddha's saying is we've got to recognise what suffering is, the regular kind of suffering of bad things happening. Well, then he says you learn the causes. Well, his view is from your lousy actions in the past, you are now experiencing the fruit of your own past actions. So then having that as your basis, you at least then recognise you're sick of suffering. So I'm going to stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing. That's junior school level. Now you go to the next level of practice and you start looking at your mind. So to start getting rid of, now you've got to realise all the delusions that are the source of why you do dumb things, are the actual source of your pain and suffering. So then you want to get to the root of it. Now you want to get rid of those delusions because that's the cause of even doing it's a more subtle level of suffering. So this is basically the first stage of practice, the wisdom wing, is like having compassion for yourself. You're working on your own self. Other people aren't your business. Get out of their heads, mind your own business, stop criticising, stop judging others, leave people alone. Every experience in your daily life, if you're doing the wisdom wing, is all about learning about your own mind. What's the learning here? What's the teaching here? So you get yourself together to some degree, and now you can get onto the compassion wing. And you don't wait till you've perfected the wisdom wing before you do that. We do all of these every day. But the compassion wing emphasis is now on others. In the first one, you're mainly backing away and leaving others alone to put yourself together, to understand yourself. Now on the basis of realising suffering and its causes, you suddenly look around and you go, oh my God, everybody's in the same boat. So the levels of love and compassion that the Buddhist view is saying we can really develop, you can't develop these until you've done the first stages. It's not possible to really have the way the Buddha's saying compassion and love for others, for everybody, not just for friends, but for everybody, until you really understood it for yourself. Because when you understand what suffering is, and you understand the causes, and you're sick of it, and so that compels you to practice, to get rid of suffering, then you look at everybody else and you realise, oh my God, look at that dog being kicked. Why? Because he must have harmed in the past. You have compassion for the dog because his own actions in the past life caused it. Then you have compassion for the guy who's kicking him because he, due to having been kicked in the past, if you like, speaking simply, is now kicking back. And he is now going to suffer in the future because of his action. So you're going to have as much compassion, if not more, for the guy doing the harm as well as the dog. Because we're all in the same boat, life after life after life, harming, being harmed, harming, being harmed, loving, being kind to receiving the benefits of our good as well. So you only can really have that level of compassion for everybody, and there's all these techniques that we go through that we spend years in retreat doing that lead you to this conclusion. It's very incremental and gradual. It's not just some sentimental, gooey feeling, everyone wants to be happy, you know. That is that, but it's got to be grounded in your really intense own practice, coming from your own realizations of your own suffering and understanding karma and delusions and wanting to get the hell out of this drama, you know. Then you have a basis for having valid compassion for others. Which is why those young Tibetan nuns, telling about their experiences of being tortured and sexually abused in prison, were able to say quite simply and genuinely, and of course we had compassion for our torturers because we realised we must have harmed them in the past and because they're going to suffer in the future. So karma is the basis of compassion for others. Compassion sounds like the nice one, the cute one, but really to have this level of compassion that is not polluted by attachment. That's the point I'm getting at. And that's why you've got to do the ridding of the attachment first. So of course it's slow, you know. But if our minds are full of attachment and neediness, we're going to be so manipulative in the way we use love, thinking we love other people. But it's got all these strings attached, like we like to say. Or as Lama Zopa puts it, the compassion and love we have now are completely polluted. I forgot the word he said. They're limited and they're polluted by our neediness, our attachment. Better than nothing. But you know, if I'm saying I love Panos, it's only because he's doing what my attachment wants. If he stops doing what my attachment wants, believe me, it'll be very hard for me to love him. And that's why we all can't stand each other and give each other up. So it's not that easy to say love and compassion, the genuine levels of it. It's really profound, actually. So you've got to be incremental, grad, junior school, high school, then we can get some solid basis. It's because love and compassion aren't just gooey feelings, you know, which is often how we think of them. And that's what gives you courage. The wisdom wing gives iron and strength to your compassion, which is the real point of all of it. The point of what a Buddha is a being who's got infinite compassion based on wisdom, and so never gives up helping others, never gets to, you know, or even a bodhisattva is a person on the way to becoming a Buddha, these various stages of cultivation. So as Dalai Lama says, bodhisattvas think in terms of eons. They've got this immense encouragement, this immense inspiration never to give up. Because you've got this wisdom that gives you courage and strength. Without that wisdom, you can't stand seeing suffering. It completely destroys us, you know. It drags us down. So without wisdom, compassion is very weak. Our love is very weak. You know, they're not soft at all. They're really intense. And with wisdom, understanding your own suffering, understanding karma, understanding your own ridiculous mind, with some self-respect, which brings your own contentment, your own fulfillment, your own joy, then you realize everyone's in the same boat, and then you only want to help. And even though you've got to a certain point in your own realizations, when you don't need to come back, you don't need to get reborn, you've done the job, baby. You want to get reborn. So in our daily life, how do we put this into practice? You can't until you understand at least technically what attachment is. Because right now, our attachment and love are like mixed together like water and milk. We literally can't see the difference. So you've got to have this inner understanding, based, of course, we're talking Buddhist psychology here, not Jung's. And his view is very distinct. So the general idea, again, to remind us, all these neuroses are necessarily I-based. And don't think that's a punitive statement. It's what causes us pain, you know. If we could see them in a raw form, we'd be absolutely shocked. And when we look at the world, we can see that. Some people are really delusional, really kind of evil, really neurotic, really paranoid, really angry, really... We can see they're seriously mentally ill. That's the delusions. Because they've got no virtue, you know, they've got no access to any virtue. Some people really have such delusional minds. So when you're doing the wisdom wing, and this is what I try to do for myself, you know, I read all these papers, you read about the world, you're seeing the world all the time. The wisdom wing is about you. So, you know, when you're reading the papers, you read Mr. Trump, who knows what, whatever, I don't care. Or Hitler, I don't care who, whatever level, or a pedophile. You know, the commonest thing we do is, oh, look at these people, how dare we, all this criticism, you know, so we're also arrogant as if we've got to describe myself so I can see other people. And it refers to all beings, including the ants and the tigers, you know. So the practice on the wisdom wing, no matter who you read about, who you see, you know, I say two things to myself. One of them is, thank you for showing me how not to be. That straight away makes it a learning for you. It's kind of humbling. Instead of, look at Mr. Trump, you know. And the second one is, I recognise that. So if Buddha's view of the mind refers to all beings, there's no delusion that others have got that we haven't got. They maybe got them more seriously. And this is why this particular model that is so simple in the use of these words, not fancy things like bipolar and all that stuff, you know, but straightforward words, anger, attachment, jealousy. The more attachment, the more anger, the more jealousy, the more delusional, the more insane a person is. It's really obvious. So these delusions are mental illnesses. But the interesting point is that our virtues, they're our saving grace. And the irony of our virtues is that it makes it harder for us to see the delusions. Do you understand? If you see a person just raging like a maniac, it's easy to see they've got anger. But a person, like I mentioned before, who hasn't expressed their anger, but has got lots of angry thoughts, but sort of manipulates to make people do what they want, and they look like they're being kind. Do you understand what I'm saying? So our virtues are our saving grace. But they ironically blind us from seeing the delusions because they're so sneaky underneath. But when you see a person being blatantly delusional, it's fairly evident. Do you understand? We've all got them. So our job is to distinguish them. So then when we can see them in ourselves, then it's easy to see it in other people. And then you're going to have compassion for them. Yeah, lock up the pedophile, please. Compassion is, no, the poor thing can't help it. That's pathetic. If you see a pedophile, you understand it's intense, raging, uncontrolled, grasping and attachment. That's it. They can't stop themselves. When we understand our own attachment, we'll understand somebody else's. Then you can have compassion, and then you can be wise in how you help that person. It's not, you know, compassion is not sentimental. Yeah.
It's a little confusing when you talk about a consciousness leaving the body, and at the same time knowing that the consciousness isn't an I.
That's right.
So is the consciousness kind of like a we?
You're so fine. I like you. Darling, no, listen. Okay, I've got to try and say this business in another way. Let me say it. I've got to say it another way. I keep forgetting your name.
Hava.
How do you spell that?
H-A-V-A.
Okay, where are you from?
U.S.
Oh, okay. You just said, yeah, you got dollars.
Shit.
So Australian, so.
What?
No, I just said, you told me you got dollars. I forgot. Okay, darling, listen, Haba. Let me say the I business. Okay, all right. So, put it this way. Buddha's saying, there is Haba, there is Tsiki, there is a Robina, there is a thermos, there is a bottle. You name it, you define it, you make sure we're all on the same page, it has a function, and we can see the world works very nicely with all these bits and pieces all doing their jobs, right? The world is full of conventional truths, conventional realities. Do we accept that? In a conventional sense, without analysis, there's a Haba, there's a Ronit, there's an Angeliki, etc. So there is an I, there is a thermos. But the Buddha is saying this, as Lama puts it. The delusions in our mind, in particular the root delusion, are decorating on top of everything we see every moment, layers upon layers of characteristics that just aren't there. So as we remove the delusions, we're removing this, we're stripping away the layers of lies that our mind is dumping on things. So the deepest lie is the one that projects, you know, like I said, attachment projects beauty onto the thermos. Aversion projects ugliness onto the thermos. Ego grasping or ignorance projects thermosness. So, you know, ego grasping projects I-ness onto the I. So all Buddha's saying is the I we think is there isn't. There is an I, but not the way we think. So we can talk conventionally, there's Haba, there's Robina. But the analysis we have to do is to begin to recognize the subtlety of the lies of this ego grasping and how it tricks us into projecting onto the basis here this Haba-ness. And this is the deepest job we have to do to discover the lie about what Haba is. And as Lama Zopa says, once you've realized the emptiness of the fantasy Haba, it's as if there's no Haba.
Okay.
But honey, there is. But what does exist is so subtle, it's as if it doesn't exist. So this is the two true, the conventional and ultimate coming together very nicely. This is it's a really refined, subtle job to do. And one of the easiest mistakes is if you hear Buddha say there is no Haba, you can be forgiven for thinking he's saying there's no I. But it's not it's more, way more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Do you understand?
That helps.
Good, darling, I'm very happy.
You mentioned purification?
Yeah, I know I did.
Is it a way you can-
I will. So the job of, the wisdom wing is, I mean, and the thing is we do all these in one day. You don't as if you do 6 years of wisdom wing. Well, you could if you're up in the mountains meditating. You might just focus on that for several years. Then you go to the compassion one. But they're all, it's sort of like they're all got their own particular techniques. So like, for example, in one day, if you do a mantra, well, that's postgraduate. That's Vajrayana. You might be kind to your friend. That's the compassion wing. That's university level. You might watch your mind. That's high school level. You might control your speech. That's junior school. When you really understand, and particularly the Tibetans are particularly good at this, presenting all the techniques and all the teachings and all the philosophy and all the metaphysics in a nice coherent package, just like learning maths or science or music, which is initially quite a surprise to us. So when you understand the different techniques and the different approaches, and you can put them all together in a more coherent way, you can see where you're at in your day, and you can take different tools out of your toolkit to apply. Maybe 1 minute you've got to control your speech. Well, that's junior school. Another time you might control your mind. Again, like I said, high school. Another time you reach out and you be generous to somebody. That's university. Another time you might do a visualization meditation on the Buddha, and you'd say that's the Vajrayana. So you do different tools at different times. But you've got to recognize in the package, like you do with music. If you open up your music book randomly, you'll be able to see immediately what grade that is. You need to know, and you need to know if you've got to that grade or if you're past that grade. It's the same here. So you don't do them all one. You don't sit on and practice grade 1 for 47 years. You go crazy. You do each step. And then as you progress, that increases your capacity to do grade 1. You know. Do you understand what I'm saying, people?
Yeah.
Okay, so love and compassion is university level. So the wisdom wing is all about you sorting out your own mess, controlling your body, controlling your speech, controlling your mind, understanding your delusions, getting some concentration, really do the unpacking and unraveling, really being your own therapist. And this is all part of junior school and high school, and part of that is the purification practice. So like I said before, the very first level is you back off and stop sowing more negative seeds. You've got to do that. First level. Why? Because you don't want weeds coming. I don't want to have future suffering. So I'm going to not kill, not lie, not steal. And a very powerful way to do that is in the context of keeping vows. And so what's a vow? Okay. The Buddha waxes lyrical about vows. They even talk about when you take vows, it's got actually kind of a subtle form that clairvoyant people can see. The Buddha says vows is so potent because it's the mind making very powerful decision. And because the mind is what creates karma, then it really makes sense. So Lama Zopa has said that, if we really, the amount of hard work we must have done in practicing virtue in the past just to get this decent life. It's not just from being a nice person. He says we must have done it, not only in the context of a very conscious spiritual practice, but in the strong context of keeping vows of morality. So, and I'll explain what they say by that. And so what he says is like this, Rinpoche said one time, you can have a person who's been, who's doing lots and lots of spiritual practice, but doesn't have, in particular, a vow not to kill. Then you have another person who's merely keeping their vows nicely, but not doing much else. He said the second person, by virtue of the intensity and strength of vows, and I'll explain, is creating infinite more virtue, meaning growing more flowers and doing infinite more purification, pulling out the weeds, because of the potency of vows. And so it's a bit like this, okay? So like we talked just briefly, I think on the first day, I didn't go into it enough, but we'll say it a bit more here. We'll talk about the purification practice before we finish. I said the word intention is the real actual meaning of the word karma, action. That everything starts with intention. Much of the stuff we do is on autopilot, so we don't notice that there is even intention there. So that typical example of killing, we had the mouse, the object, then your mind involved in it, the recognition, that's the mouse, the intention to kill the mouse, and the motivation to kill the mouse. 3, the action, 4, the result. That's 4 components of a typical action of killing. And if all those 4 are there, and the motivation is a lousy one, then you drop a negative seed into your negative seed bank vault, which will then ripen as many future suffering rebirths. So, I could be chatting away to Harvard, and suddenly I go like that. I don't even blink. But I've already done those 4 things for a mosquito. There's a mosquito there. The next part, my mind involved, there's recognition, that's a mosquito. Next is intention, I will kill the mosquito. The reason, how dare a mosquito take my blood? Aversion, anger. Then I do the action and I know it's dead without even a blink of the eye. And that's even a fairly obvious action. But we've got so many actions we do that are so much more instinctive, but they've still got those 4 components there, but we're just programmed in them. So we're creating infinite numbers of karmas all the time. Now, the point is here, with a vow, so here we are sitting in this room right now, probably not killing anything. So the business about killing is one of the key karmas we need bucket loads of to even just get a decent human body, they say, is to have an accumulation of lots of strong, intentional habit of non-killing, conscious non-killing. So look, if we're not killing anything right now, and that's because there's no creature there, then there's no thought not to kill, is there? We're not having a thought, I will not kill, because there's no creature to kill. Therefore, even though we're not killing right now, we're being nice people, we're not creating any virtue of non-killing. And we have to have bucket loads of conscious non-killing seeds in our bank vault, even just to get a decent human body. Can you hear the technical, what I'm saying? Are we hearing the point I'm making?
Yeah.
Neil, you get my point? No, okay. Okay. Do you accept that at the moment you're not killing anything? But there's no thought, you're not saying, I will not kill. Therefore, if you agree that karma equals intention, then it's only when you say, I will not kill, that you put a nice little seed in your bank vault of a good non-killing karmic seed. Would you agree? Yeah. But if you're not thinking it, you're not putting any karma in the bank, are you? So there's no karma, you're not creating any karma of non-killing at this moment. And we need, the Buddha says, bucket loads of non-killing seeds in our bank vault.
It's only calm when I'm thinking of killing, I can give the opposite.
So what I'm saying is, when we're not thinking of doing something, there's no karma. So if you equally put your foot on the mouse and you kill it, but there's no thought, you don't create the karma of killing. But if there's, but if there's no sentient being there and you're not killing anybody, even though you're a nice person, you're not creating the karma of non-killing. And we need lots of non-killing karmas in our bank. Are you with me?
Yeah.
So this is where vows come in. That's what they say. They say this. Buddha says this. Vow, because what a vow is you sit down in front of somebody who represents the Buddha for you. You've decided you want to take refuge as a Buddhist, as a little formal ceremony, and then you secondly can take the lay person's vows. And the first one is to not kill. So you sit down in front of somebody whom you're seeing as the Buddha, and you vow, from now until I die, I will never kill any sentient being. And what you mean is intentionally. So that means throughout your life you've got this vow, and every day you reiterate that vow, you strengthen it, and every day you purify any killing you've done. So the Buddha would say that 24 hours a day you've got that vow, even when you're asleep, even when you're having fun in the pub. Because you've got this intense vow in your mind stream, you're ticking over virtuous karmic seeds and you're purifying your mind because of the intensity of what a vow is. That's the point I'm trying to make. Do you understand? And I think it makes sense, if you and I decide to have a relationship and then we decide to commit to each other, we bring in the witnesses, we sit looking each other in the eye, and we vow, don't we? I will not cheat on you, you won't cheat on me. It has more power than merely being nice to each other, because it's something more potent for the mind. It's sort of obvious, I think. So the Buddha's into vows, or these different levels of vows. So the very first level is to have these simple vows, just the main ones. You intend never to kill a living being, never to steal, never to lie, never to jump on the wrong partner or to misuse your body for sexual abuse, And if and you don't have to take all 5. And the 5th one would be no intoxicants. And people just tried to use these. So by having those every day and then doing purification, so living a life of intentional non-killing and non-harming in the context of vows is the very first thing to do. And then you have your extra practice at the end of the day where you purify and strengthen these vows and purify any old past rubbish, And then that's really a perfect junior school practice. And that's the only way you're going to get ahead of the game. You're kind of putting atomic bombs under the seeds you've already put. You stop creating new negative seeds and you put atomic bombs under the seeds you've already planted by living in vows and by purifying. Does that make sense?
Then do you really create even worse karma if you break the vow?
You do, but because you take it so seriously, you do take it seriously if you do it, the benefit is way outweighs, because it keeps you on. It's like, of course it is. If you've got a real sincere commitment to somebody, and then you go and break it, it is more powerful than if you just sleep around because you've got no commitment. It's okay. So, but if you take your vow seriously and you have a real understanding of it, and you want to, a vow is like a decision not to go over 120 miles an hour on the freeway in Germany or whatever it is. No, that you can do what you like in Germany. There's no speed limit. Wherever it is, because that's the rule. It's like you've agreed to that commitment. So then when you break it, you understand. Anyway, that's not a very good example. Of course it's heavier, but because you take it so seriously, if you do even, it's like you've got this in your mind all the time and you don't want to break for your benefit. This is where it's so important to hear karma, not as somebody's going to punish you, as guidelines for yourself. They're guidelines to help you be the person you want to become. So you take them seriously. And you always have them in your mind, and they guide you because you know what they are. And then if you do weaken them, you by doing the practice at the end of the day, where you, and this is the four opponent, they call it the four opponent powers. This is a purification, and like anything, it's a psychological process. There's a nice way to remember it, calling them the 4 R's. All this is in your book, in your notes, by the way. The 4 R's, and the lamas use the analogy of like you've just eaten poison. So the first step, if someone says you've eaten poison, the first step is, oh bloody hell, what an idiot, I can't believe I've eaten poison. Quick, where's the doctor? That's reasonable, right? That's regret. You acknowledge you did it, you regret it because you don't want sickness, and then you think, whom can I turn to? That's the first 2 steps, regret and reliance. So here we're talking about regretting actions we've done, first of all, actions we've done to harm others. So in general, you think of stuff in this life, like I had an abortion when I was 23. As far as I'm concerned, using the Buddha's view, that was a consciousness that went into my womb at the time of conception. In fact, I have the memory of it. I'm not trying to give you too much information, but I remember it vividly. I was a good hippie, I did what hippies did. I was a serious hippie. But I remember this moment where this, doesn't matter the details, but it was crystal clear. I thought to myself, oh no, I'm pregnant. The second, when I was with this guy, I knew that second. I didn't know the words even, but I knew something. A consciousness went inside me. It was crystal clear. And that's what they say conception is then. When the egg and sperm meet, the consciousness runs there. So anyway, I always use that as a good example of killing for myself. So I regret it. So, this is a process just for your own mind. So the first step is, and we do this at the end of the day, and the way to do it is really to be very simple and down to earth about it, not to sort of read holy words, but to do it sincerely. It's like I kind of figure this process is a bit like being your own friend, You're checking up at the end of the day, you sit down. So first you can regret the things you did that day, like, badmouth my husband, kick the dog, whatever. Things that are disturbing you. You regret your part in it. You regret the actions you did with your body and speech to harm others. You think of 1 or 2, but then you can think of general stuff in that life. So I always say, I regret that killing, And then in general, you can then say, and I regret any harm I've ever done to any sentient being since beginning of this time with my body and speech. And you regret it sincerely because why? Because you have to say that. Because, you know what, Robina, I say to myself, I don't want future suffering. Just like you regret the poison because you don't want a sick belly, And this is why it's nothing to do with guilt, I'm a bad person, or even then nothing to do with getting someone to forgive you, which is the typical one, It's a different attitude, and we've got to cultivate it. It's for your own sake. I regret the killing, the lying, the stealing, weakening my vows, doing this, doing that, whatever, because, Robina, I don't want the future suffering. And when you say it like that, it grounds it in something practical, not some guilty feeling of being a naughty girl, Regret is based on not wanting suffering, which is why you regret eating poison. You regret the killing, the breaking of your vows, the lying, the stealing. The second step is, well, whom can I turn to? Well, here we turn to the Buddha. Our doctor in this case is the Buddha. And this is the crucial difference. If I'm confessing to Jesus, I have to beg God to forgive me, because that's the process, because God's the boss, but not here. Buddha would forgive you. He's a nice guy, I promise. But it's not the issue. Forgiveness is not the issue here. So you turn to the Buddha, whom you rely upon, whose medicine you have decided you want to use. You've chosen the Buddha. He's not forcing it down your throat. So you rely upon the Buddha. You'd say some kind of, you remind yourself of your reliance upon the Buddha. And we do this practice in the context of a particular practice called a visualization of the Buddha called Vajrasattva. So you'd visualize the Buddha above your head, whatever. We do this certain practice in number 3 step. Then the second part of this reliance, as they call it, is now where you have compassion for others. Regret's like compassion for yourself. You're sick of suffering, so you regret the things you did to cause it. And the second part of the second step of the second part of the second step, you now think of those you've harmed. So the first one has to be, you know what, Robina, I'm sick of this habit of shouting at Paros. You've got to own responsibility for your own part of the deal. You've got to see the suffering it causes you instead of, rushing off. What we tend to do is I rush off and I ring Paros, oh darling, I'm so sorry to upset you. Will you forgive me? So essentially I'm dumping it on him to get me off the hook from my rubbish. Then he says, it's all right, Robina, I still love you. Then you go, oh, phew, got off the hook. He still loves me. And you don't do anything about it. It's not enough, you know. It's just misusing him, getting him to make me feel better. That's quite heavy, actually. We use it like that. Because I don't want him to give me up, you know. I'm scared he'll stop liking me. It's really not right. But if you do the regret first, you take responsibility. You know, my part of it, I do shout. Yes, he does make me crazy, but that's my problem. So you regret what you do. You regret your part of it. You regret your laziness or your anger, your jealousy, your depression. You know, with wholesomeness, with respect for yourself, because you're sick of this bloody suffering, you know. Then I can have compassion for him. I know what it's like to be beaten up. I know what it's like to be shouted at. So I have compassion for him. The third step is you do the antidote, they call this, or in the 4 R's, you can call it the remedy. So there's all many practices you can do here. And the particular one that all the lamas praise is this particular visualization of this particular Buddha and the recitation of mantra and the visualization. It's all your mind doing it. Your mind is doing this. As Lama Yeshe says, you know, purification is the power of the regret, the power of this second one, the regret, the first one regret, the second refuge, reliance, the third, the power of the remedy. And the fourth one, the most important, the power of resolve. So resolve, the fourth step, is when I decide, okay, I'll give myself a timeline. I will not shout at Panos for 24 hours. You really take responsibility. I will not do it. You can't say, I'll never do it again. That's lying to yourself. You're not ready. But you say, okay, I won't shout for 24 hours. And you say it sincerely. This is where you really are talking to yourself. This process is really personal. And if we don't take it, if we just do it as some religious practice because we've taken Vajrasattva initiation, we just do the mantra mindlessly, it's not enough, you know. You've got to go through these 4 steps. It's like it's practical psychology. And it's like you being your own friend. You're growing up. You're becoming accountable. You're being reasonable with yourself. And as Lama Zopa says, you know, we're insane not to do this practice every day. We do it at the end of every day, you know. You're kind of taking care of the weeds. Or no, the first one, living in vows and not killing and lying, stealing now, is ensuring you don't do more. And then the purification is putting atomic bombs on the ones you've already done and strengthening your commitment to not do them more. So this is a basic, fundamental practice. Without this, your practice won't grow. Without this, there's no point in meditating. You won't get far. Without this, there's no point in trying to even get real love and real compassion and practice Vajrayana. You just won't get far. This is the foundation. This is the basis. This is the absolute fundamentals. Without this, nothing can grow. Without this, your bodhisattva vows won't grow. Without this, your tantric vows won't grow. This is the basis. Without this, we don't have a practice. We're lying to ourselves. If you say you're a Buddhist. All right? Mm-hmm. Neil? Mm-hmm. That too?
Yeah.
Sweetheart? Good. It's in your book. And he'll send you the PDF. Those course notes you got, it's all there. No, it's only 4:30. Oh. How do you take refuge? You ask a person if you'd please give it to you.
Anyone.
Well, a person you've decided you like as one of your teachers and you really have confidence in them, you've checked up on them.
What's the procedure?
Of taking refuge. Oh, just 5 minutes.
Refuge and recognition are the same thing.
No. Refuge and... No, that's different.
The second step.
No. The second... No. Refuge... Refuge... Yeah, reliance in this first step of purification is the second step... Yeah, the second step, reliance, is including this process of when you sort of formally... You do it daily to day, but there's a formal process where a person becomes a Buddhist for the first time. It's like Buddhist Baptism. You formally become a Buddhist, and you do that in front of somebody where you just repeat 3 times, I will take refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and blah, blah, blah. You know, you do that formally in front of somebody whom you've decided you'll see as one of your teachers who represents the Buddha for you, because you feel like you've checked up on the Buddha, you want to rely upon the Buddha, and you don't have to take the vows, the first one, and you sort of develop a practice. Mm-hmm. So you can take it in front of somebody, that's what you do. Yeah. Is there any more questions?
Regret also comes blame.
What, sweetheart?
Regrets and blame for me are very...
I know, that's why we've got to analyse very carefully the thought process. So guilt is I remember the Dalai Lama saying this. It was very, very helpful. Somebody asked, what's the difference between this regret we're describing and guilt? Well, the typical one we have, if we don't analyse it, we think of something we did wrong, and the first thing we then say is, oh, I must be a bad person. That's the typical one we do. That's the irony of ego. Ego does that. And it's the same as if you do something wrong, I'll say, you did this and you're a bad person. So guilt is internalised anger. And it's not helpful. It's useless. It just drags us down, and it's not accurate, Neil. It's over-exaggerating our badness. Just like when I'm mad at Panos, it's over-exaggerating his badness. Do you understand? So what we have to do is consciously change it. And this regret is like, if you ate poison, you wouldn't say, oh, I just ate poison, oh, I'm such a bad person. You would never say that, would you?
I would say stupid.
Well, but what would you do then? But then, that's fine, but then what would you do?
Panic and then go to the doctor.
Precisely. But what do we do here with guilt? We just sit there and swim in it and get miserable and beat ourselves up. It's utterly useless. Imagine every day you're getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and you keep beating yourself up for eating poison. It's looking in the past. It's obsessive. There's no action involved. So we've got to consciously say, I regret killing, lying, stealing. But then you've got to say to yourself, why? Because I don't want the future suffering. And that's more like the poison one. It's more proactive and it's intelligent. It's grown up. What can I do about it? You've got to say those words. Otherwise it just becomes guilt. And it's very deep inside us to feel that. Do you understand? And that's why in the Buddhist view, you've got to have some sense, even intellectually, of this idea of karma. That what you do does bring consequences to you. Whether it's even in future lives, but even in general, the general idea of karma is that whatever you do sows seeds in your mind that brings consequences to you. And that brings accountability. Do you understand? Yeah. What else, people?
The dream, I want to be present in my dream.
What, precious girl?
When you said, I want to be present in my dream.
Oh, okay, that one. Now that you want to be conscious that you are dreaming while you're dreaming. The reason is, based on what we've just talked about, the death process, that's your subtle consciousness. And your subtle consciousness is way more powerful. So if you've had any, let's say, you know, Dalai Lama says in the teachings one time, if you can see your dreams as dreams, they talk about this in the Vajrayana. If you can see your dreams while you're dreaming, then because you've had teachings, then you try to meditate on emptiness. That's the best way to do. Or you try to at least be, okay, but even less than that, just to be conscious that you're dreaming is a good practice, because then you're learning to not just be overwhelmed by whatever happens. And they often use that as an analogy to live your life as if it's a dream. Because you know, when we're so caught up in our delusions, we're completely absorbed in everything is 100% concrete and we can't see past our own noses. But the more we realise impermanence, and the more we think about emptiness, and the more we think about karma, you take things seriously, but it becomes more spacious, less concrete and drama-ridden, you know, because your mind is becoming more clear and more sharp. So realising you're dreaming when you're dreaming is a good way to live your life, they say.
I don't remember if last year I spoke to you about my daughter and I that both have sleep paralysis, and we see people, you know, that come to us, and you sent me an email with a mantra, the medicine mantra. That was,
I do. And has that stopped?
It was amazing. It worked. My daughter actually was able to, and I didn't know she was doing it. It was about 6 months later. She told me she had another one. And I said, oh, it's a shame you didn't do that. She said, I did.
Wow.
She recited the mantra during sleep paralysis.
That's amazing. So it helped. Yeah, that's a more serious thing. I was talking about spirits, actual beings who are harming you.
Yeah, I still get it, but I don't. That's why I'm wondering, you know, that. But now every night I will say that. You really try and do that before you sleep. Then you'll be really conscious when it happens. You see, that's the thing about subtle consciousness. That's what leaves the body and gets out of body experiences. That's what gets clairvoyant. People in dreams can see the past and the future. And then there are all these beings, I didn't talk enough about it, but all these suffering beings in this universe are some called spirits, who are disembodied, whom we have very strong karma with. So instead of meeting a man who beats you up, you meet a spirit who beats you up. And they easily can interfere with at this subtle level. And in dreams is very common. They can come and interfere. So this is why to do a practice before you go to sleep, to try and be clear that you are dreaming. Calls it that? Well, or sleep apnea.
What's that mean?
Just that you're you can't move, you're paralyzed.
Yeah,
I scream, I can't.
Oh, so tell me more. I forget. Tell me more. Tell me more.
Trapped in the body, you can't move.
No, okay. So tell me. Just explain more.
My last one I had, I actually saw a guy. The lights were on the stairway, and I saw a guy in. I don't know what he was wearing here, but he had a blue checkered shirt on, and he was coming up the stairs very slowly. But his intent was to hurt me.
So you're in a you're asleep,
Yeah.
and it's like in a dream. But your subtle consciousness is seeing him happen. That's what subtle consciousness can do. So then what happens?
And I start to scream,
And you don't. You can't.
and I can't. No noise comes out, and
Okay.
suddenly I'm released.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you. Now I'm remembering. That's easy to explain. Subtle consciousness. No, really, subtle consciousness is a person in a coma. A person in a coma is in their subtle consciousness. That's a dream mind. I had it only one time. I had a shocking dream, and then I woke up and I couldn't move. That's because your earth element hasn't come back. That's what it is. Your other elements, like when the death process is gradually, the earth element ceases, the water element, the fire, well, these elements haven't come back. Your consciousness has come back to consciousness, but your earth element hasn't, so you can't move. That's what it is. That's what's happening. So it's really, but what happens, so then tell me what your daughter, the same kind of thing for her.
You told me to tell her to show compassion towards these holdings.
But you're telling me that...
She actually has creatures crawling up.
That's okay. That's right. That's these unhappy beings who live in these other realms. And because she's asleep, she can observe them. So are they still coming, or is she doing the mantra to stop them?
She hasn't spoken about them.
Okay.
It's not bothered. She's obviously getting...
But she does the mantra. She said.
Yeah. And I didn't know it. I sent it.
Yes.
To her.
Yes.
I didn't know. We never spoke of it. But she recited it, and she can say it off by heart now.
Well, it's amazing. That's that one. That's the. The medicine Buddha.
The medicine.
It was the medicine Buddha mantra.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting. No, I remember now vividly.
But I did have one lately. I just
Tell me.
My husband's used to it.
Right. Yes.
That's
right.
And I jumped out of bed, and I put my back up against the wall. I pinned myself against the wall like this, and I was awake. I saw everything, and I screamed 3 times. And then I released, and then I just hysterically started laughing because I was.
So then, when you do this, is it just that you're paralyzed, or that you can also see beings?
I see beings. And I'm paralyzed.
They're harmful beings.
They seem
to be harmful, but once you wake up, it's okay.
Yeah. But I don't know if it's because it's so common and I'm just used to it.
Very interesting, yeah. You see, this is the thing that the Buddhism is saying. There's all these countless sentient beings throughout universes, and when we're in a gross body, we can't see. Some people can, even in their gross body, but it's often in your dreams or when you go to sleep or you have visions and things, or people can see, and many people go crazy because they don't know what to do about it, because there are so many beings living all over the place, so many intensely suffering beings.
I spoke to you about it, I really relaxed about it.
I'm so pleased. Wow, that's amazing. Well done. Go on. That's very... Well, that's the medicine Buddha mantra. There's so many mantras, but that's one. There's a particular other.
I also used it for a kitten I found dying.
Oh, you did? Well done, girl. One of the best. In this book of Rinpoche's, there's like 87 different practices, and the one he repeatedly says, if you want one practice, medicine Buddha, baby. There's medicine Buddha practice, there's medicine Buddha mantra, and there's medicine Buddha reciting the name. So maybe you should get the book and look up that practice in the back of the book. You'll see. Just even do a little bit more. No, really, it'll be good for you. That'd be brilliant. That's very interesting. My goodness, I'm very pleased to hear that.
Robina, I had an experience that looks like this one.
Okay. And you need to tell us? You need to tell me. You need to say it out loud to understand it, do you?
Maybe it is helpful.
No, not helpful if somebody... We already had hers. I'm not trying to be rude, but if you don't understand it, then we need to talk about it. If you understand it, based on this conversation, there is no need to tell it, because this stuff's kind of really private. Don't need to talk about it, Maria, I would suggest. And if you want to, we talk about it privately. I mean, it happens to be whatever.
Because I thought that it might be helpful. No other reason.
No other reason. No need to say it. She's fine what she's doing. If you want to talk privately, you can do that. Okay. Very interesting.
I have a question.
Yeah, go on.
What is the position from the Buddhist point of view regarding the usage of plant medicine to get into certain levels of the mind?
The Buddhist view, no moralistic view, do what you like. Okay, in general, I'll put it this way. Whatever methods we can use to help us see our minds more deeply, please use them. But like anything, no, I'm not even trying to joke here. I'm not trying to be stupid. Please hear me properly. Please hear me properly. But like anything you do, you look at the consequences of things. But that's the first point. Second, when you realize that it's not subtle, it's gross, really gross, and it's still based on the senses. This method of getting to your subtle concentration, which the Hindus invented 3,000 years ago, is a superior method. You don't need stupid old drugs. But if it doesn't mean it can't be useful. When I was into marijuana and acid and things in the past, it was really helpful for my mind to open me up to seeing things differently. But it can only go so far. And that's not a moralistic statement, that's a practical one. It can only go so far. That's all. That's my answer.
Towards the same direction, but it's never.
I don't think it's even going in the same. I think it probably increases your sensory craving, basically. If it increases your attachment, what's the good of it? And very often it does. If it helps, if whatever you do, whether it's eating food or having a glass of champagne or smoking a marijuana cigarette, if it helps you see your mind more clearly, then please, that's perfect. That's the bottom line. But in the end, often things just become addictions, and then we get lazy, and then where does it go? It doesn't go far.
I was not talking about marijuana in this case. I was talking about traditions that happen in South America.
Yeah, whatever they are. There's just the variations of the same thing.
Well, yeah, it's not for fun.
I understand. And the Hindus as well. The Hindus back then, they smoked marijuana until it came out of their ears. So, but it only goes so far, is what I would suggest.
Okay.
But if we're common sense people and intelligent, please be courageous and use whatever methods you like to help you see your mind more. The bottom line is to get into your mind. But I would suggest from here and knowing about these things that they're necessarily still based on the senses. Because once you get with concentration to a subtle level of mind, you would look like you were dead. It's beyond your senses. Subtle consciousness is beyond the senses. So it's a question of why you're doing it and what you want to achieve, isn't it? That's up to you. But that's the way I'd answer it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What else, people? Time to go home? Oh. Yes, darling.
How much time does it take for a person to reincarnate after the death?
Not more than 49 days. You can spend up to 49 days in this intermediate state between lives. Very, very rarely ever longer than that. Shorter than that most times.
Okay, I try to understand how we can solve this problem.
Sorry, darling?
How can we solve this problem between cultures that they give a different length
You can't. There's no problem to be solved. It's for you to find out what's true. There's no problem to be solved. You have to just look into it yourself and work out what's true. That's it. Mind your own business. And don't have to be political. I mean, we can have conversations with each other, but in the end, if it's all coming from different people's experiences, let them have their experiences, and you have to find out what's true. And even in the Buddhist teachings, there are different views about it. So we have to look into this stuff ourselves and come to our own direct experiential, results, don't we? That's the idea. That's the answer. Yeah. So I don't know, people. We can talk about this till the cows come home. Huh? What? What, darling? What, Hava?
A little bit of prayer.
You want some more prayers, for God's sake? Okay. I'll sing some prayers to finish. Let me get some more prayers and I'll sing some. Here you go. I'll just get my little prayer book on my iPad. Where's my iPad? Here it is. Here it is. All right, I'll sing some prayers. We've got no prayers in our prayer books, but never mind. Okay. To find some first. Let me see. I don't know. Different tunes for different prayers. All right. All right. Kewaji Nududag Lama Sange Drugyune Drowa Chikyang Malupa Dei Sala Gopashok Jangchob Semchog Rinpoche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyuchig Ke Panyam Pa Me Payang Gong Ne Gong Du Pabashok Gangri Rawe, this is a long life prayer for the Dalai Lama. Gangri Rawe Korwe Jingam Dir Pendang Dewa Malu Zhongwe Ne Chenre Zigwang Tenzin Gyatso Yi Shape Site Bardu Tengyur Chik. And then one for Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Tob Tsul Chang Jing Jam Gun Gelwe Ten Sin Kyo Pelwe Kinzo Dog Porte Chog Sum Kurwe Legman Tudrub Padag Sog Dul Je Gandu Jab Ten Shok. Okay?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Tiki, for inviting me. Thank you, Runit, for having me in your lovely place. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
May we continue never giving up, working on our wonderful minds, having courage and confidence in yourself, no matter how bad it gets. Have absolute confidence in our own amazing potential. This is fundamental. I don't care how much love and compassion you have for others. If we can't have this fundamental confidence in our own marvelous qualities, we can't get far, right? And this is the basis. Then on the basis of this, we can be huge and vast and help many people. Start with ourselves. And never give up. Okay? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.